Time for today's Skinny Podcast on Local12.com. My pleasure to welcome in one of the multiple voices of the Reds. Jim Kelch does TV and radio. And, Jim, I guess we'd be remiss if we don't start with kind of the news of last night. We actually set this up before the whole Joey Votto situation went down, but you did the TV side last night, so you got a chance to see it firsthand. You got a chance to see multiple replays of it. Joey was very remorseful after the game, but what was your instant reaction when you saw him bump the umpire and then really saw it on replay?
Well, Richard, when I saw him bump the umpire, I thought, oh boy, nothing good's going to come out of this. You figure he's going to be suspended, but we were able on Fox Ohio to show multiple replays from different angles, and I think you could see a lot of different things. Number one, Joey was upset with himself. He had swung and missed. They'd been pounding him inside, and he didn't really like that strike one call that was against him in that. But when the at-bat ended, he threw his helmet down, which is an automatic fine. And then he started to walk away. You could see him hollering at someone, but later on when we saw a different angle of that, we thought maybe he was hollering at Garrett Cole, but Garrett Cole's back was to him, and he kind of looked over his shoulder real quickly and just kept walking as if to say, I don't know who he's talking to or what, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. And then apparently the umpire, Chris Conroy, thought that he may have been hollering at him, but I really just think it was a case of misunderstanding between the umpire and Joey Votto, because really Joey didn't do anything, in my estimation, to get ejected. And as you said, then he was very remorseful after the game for bumping the umpire. He said he has a standard to hold, and he didn't do that. He crossed the line. He was very apologetic. But I suspect he will get a suspension probably of a game or so. But really, at the end of the day on that thing for me, it was a misunderstanding between Conroy and Votto, and Conroy really thinking what Votto was saying was directed at him when it really was not.
Yeah, I wrote something on Local12.com today in which I really thought the ejection is very questionable. I thought Joey's act itself was selfish because you've got to just be smarter in that circumstance because you know, and as he talked about, you know you bump an umpire, you're probably going to sit down. I guess the only thing I would ask in kind of conclusion of this part, Jim, is, you know, if indeed the umpire looks back and says, you know what, I did misunderstand what he said, maybe there's the silver lining that hopefully baseball looks and says, all right, the bump wouldn't have occurred if not for the ejection. The umpire then said, hey, he thought he was yelling at him when in retrospect he was not. But I suspect you're right. It's going to be at least probably a game, if not a couple of 3 games. Well,
it was funny, Richard, that Joey gets ejected when his back was to the umpire, and he didn't even realize.
It was on the field.
Until Billy Hatcher came up to him and said, hey, you've been tossed out of the game, and then he kind of lost his mind for a little bit. He didn't even realize it. The weird circumstance was Conroy threw him out, and right after he got thrown out, Joey kind of turned around and looked, but Conroy had already made the signal that you're tossed out. He was writing something on his score sheet, so Votto didn't even realize what was going on, and as we talked about Garrett Cole, Cole had no idea what was going on either. He didn't realize that Votto was even hollering, and I don't know if Votto was really hollering at him, more than he was upset with himself. And so, it was just a weird set of circumstances that all came together, and unfortunately for Votto and the Reds, got him tossed out of the game. Fortunately, it didn't hurt them in terms of winning the game last night.
The Reds, as we speak here on this Thursday afternoon, 14-13, going for a sweep of Pittsburgh tonight on Thursday night, a chance to get to 15-13. And you can argue that some of the reason they're over 500, Jim, is because they beat up on the Brewers, which aren't very good. They have a chance to sweep the Pirates now for a second time this year tonight. But really, when you look at some of the different things, Jay Bruce not hitting, Billy Hamilton not getting on base consistently, Todd Frazier slugging but not with a great average, Marlon Byrd scuffling for a big portion of this season, Johnny Cueto not getting run support. How is this team at least one game over 500 or maybe 2 over 500 after tonight?
Well, you know, they are scrapping it out. I really believe that. Different guys are getting things done at different times. Votto certainly has been a force offensively. Marlon Byrd is finally coming around, a little bit. Brian Pena, when he has played, has done a nice job. You mentioned the home runs by Frazier. He certainly hasn't hit the way we thought average-wise, but he has had some key hits. Zach Cozart, we complained about him all winter, saying this guy has to hit better, and he has. And then Brandon Phillips is doing a nice job. His average is over 300. Going into tonight's game, he had 3 hits last night. So I think they're getting a little bit here and there from players. And you know, you go through the course of a 6-month season, and nothing is always going to be right. There's always going to be an issue somewhere where someone is not doing something. And, you can even look at the Cardinals right now and say, well, their starting pitching is going to have an issue because of this or that. They lost to the Cubs last night. There's going to be problems all the time with teams simply because that's the nature of sports, whether it be baseball, football, basketball, what have you. And this team is going through that now. They have beaten up on the Brewers, as you said. They have beaten up on the Pirates. But in the end, everybody has to play the Brewers. Everybody has to play the Pirates. And what if they weren't beating up on these teams? What would we be saying about the team then if they weren't doing that? They are expected to beat these teams right now, and they are doing that. The real test will come when they start playing some of these teams that have been successful so far this year and see how they do against them.
Jim, the bullpen was a mess at the first few 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of the season. It seems like it's gotten now a little more settled down. I listened to the radio pregame last night in which Brian Price was asked, is Tony Cingrani your 8th inning guy? And he said, yeah, but it could extend even beyond that. It could be matchups. I bring him in earlier. I bring Jumbo in earlier. It seems like, though, at least Tony Cingrani has given them some stability to bridge the gap to a Aroldis Chapman. I'll ask you a tough question because you're not Brian Price, but what took so long for them to maybe get to Cingrani to be maybe that 8th inning guy?
Well, Cingrani, remember, was going to be a starter at the beginning of the year, and then when things, for some reason, after a couple of starts, they didn't see something that they liked out of Tony Cingrani. More likely than not, his pitch count, they appeared to think it was still going to be too high. He wasn't being as pitch efficient as he needed to be, so they put him in the bullpen. He sulked about that a little bit. He was not happy with that at all. And then the other thing, Richard, is they had other guys that they felt were going to fill those roles. I mean, we had a guy who's been a closer in the big leagues for years, Kevin Gregg. He was going to be that 8th inning guy. Burt Badenhop, who has had some tremendous years in the big leagues the last 3 or 4 years, albeit all with different teams, was going to be a 7th inning guy. And you had Manny Parra in there, and you had Jumbo Diaz. So Tony Cingrani was going to be a long guy / possible spot starter. And it eventually just became his turn because Jumbo Diaz didn't get it done consistently enough. Certainly Kevin Gregg didn't get it done. Badenhop didn't get it done. And so by the process of elimination, you come to Tony Cingrani, who, remember, had a lot of relief experience in his college days down at Rice. And he now seems to have embraced that role of coming in and going 100% for an inning or 2 innings and getting the job done.
Obviously, Jim, the Devin Mesoraco situation has been a strange one, but the other day news was that he's going to try a little bit longer, and if not, it's going to need surgery on that hip for the impingement. But he's going to get a chance maybe this weekend to DH, get 5 at-bats in a game, 4 or 5 at-bats in a game, maybe test it a second day to see how it holds up. How important is this weekend then on the decision front for Devin Mesoraco if he can get some at-bats and then say, okay, I'm at least okay enough to do this? Or is this maybe fish or cut bait time, that if he's got soreness after 1 day of being a DH, that the time has come to probably have the surgery?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Richard. I think this weekend is huge for him, the 3 games against the White Sox. And it was funny, too, because it was Devin who came out and said it's a possible situation that I could need surgery. It's not somebody in the higher up from the Reds. It was Mesoraco who made that statement, and it's also Mesoraco who said, I don't know that I can do it 2 or 3 days in a row. We'll have to see. I think he'll do it Friday against Chicago, and then we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully he'll be able to do it at least 2 of the days, possibly all 3 days, and come out of it feeling pretty good. But remember, this team has a lot of games coming up against American League clubs on the road after they get home after this White Sox series, a week at home against National League, and then back out onto the road at Kansas City for 2, at Cleveland for 3. So you've got another 5 games there. So you have 8 games out of a 15-game stretch, I think, coming up where you need the DH. You'd like to think that a guy who hit 25 home runs and was an all-star last year could fill that role. If he can't do that, yeah, I would agree with you. I think it would be then time to really take a serious look at the potential of trying to get this guy right and get him hopefully behind the plate again, albeit probably not this year.
Yeah, that's the last part I'll ask you is, I mean, we are at a stage, even if he can DH for the games you've talked about, Jim, you're not going to play on the road against American League teams very often the rest of the way. So he has got to find a position if that's the case. If not, I mean, you almost do have to shut it down. At this stage of the game, he's got to find a way to try to catch between now and you would hope the end of May at some point.
Yeah, I would think so too, and he has not done that yet. And in fact, Brian Price had said the other day that they didn't think he was really that close to even trying it. So, you know, that impingement thing with the hip, we've heard other players have it. A-Rod had it. I think there's been a couple of other players, but no other catcher that we know of has had this injury, had the surgery, and come back and been able to continue to catch. So it is a huge issue for the Reds that they need to resolve, particularly when you know, if they don't want to have the surgery right away, this is a guy that can pinch hit, and really that's it. You can't double switch with him. I don't want to say it's a wasted position, but it certainly is a position that puts Brian Price in a limited role there. He would not probably like me saying that at all, because he's quickly one to deny.
Right, he's dismissed that a bunch of different times. You're right, but it is what it is. I mean, he is hamstrung by that, no pun intended, because he can only pinch hit.
Yeah, and you can't get him in there to catch. You have to have a third catcher here, one really not being able to do that role. So it does limit him a lot if Mesoraco is going to be unable to catch even once or twice a week.
Lastly, in that regard, I know this has been brought up some and kind of pushed to the side as well, but if it comes to the point where they continue to say that they don't want to do the surgery, yet he can't catch, how much do they need to at least look in the short term, or maybe at least for the rest of the year, of playing him somewhere else and testing him somewhere else?
You know, I've heard that brought up a lot too, Richard, but I'll be honest with you. There's not a position that I look at on the field and say, well, let's put Devin Mesoraco out there. I think a story came out the other day, or maybe I was talking with someone with the ball club. Devin Mesoraco, throughout his amateur career also, has always been a catcher. Right. I think I read, and I could be misquoting here, that he has never played a different position other than catching. High school coming up, you know, before that in youth baseball, he was always a catcher. And even if he had played other positions, I don't know that he's going to bump Todd Frazier, who's a potential Gold Glover, at third out of a position. He's certainly not going to bump Joey Votto at first base off of his position. He's not going to bump Bird out in left field out of his position, who seems to be coming around now. And even if he were to be out there, you're talking about a couple of young guys in Waldrop and a couple of other minor leaguers that potentially would be in left field in the future. So I just don't know that there is another position for Devin Mesoraco to play if he can't catch.
Jim, I appreciate the time very much. Enjoy the game tonight. Reds go for the second sweep of Pittsburgh this season, chance to get to 15 and 13, and then on to Chicago. Appreciate the time.
All right, Richard.
That's Jim Kelch, one of the voices of the Reds, on today's Skinny Podcast here on Local12.com.